This is a third video in a three-part series of videos on how to draw airplanes, and in this video I'm going to be demonstrating steps 5 to 7 of the method that I use, and I'll be doing the illustration with this Fokker Triplane. So picking up in step 5, we're going to outline and shape the fuselage. And I'm going to start by drawing the top view outline, and I start where the nose is. So I'm drawing the cowling that goes around the engine in the nose, and then I just work my way back towards the tail, drawing the left side of the fuselage and then the right side of the fuselage. And to draw this, you're just going to use your top view reference grid. And working back towards the tail, it's pretty simple. It just tapers back to a point there by the tail. And next we'll draw the side view. We're going to outline the side view of the fuselage. So again, I'm going to start up at the nose and show the cowling there, and then work my way back to the tail. There's the top of the side view and the bottom of the side view of the fuselage. And from the tail, I'm working my way back towards the nose. And you can see how in my foreshortened reference grid, my scaffold makes it easy for me to see exactly how to draw the outline there. And next, to shape it, I'm going to draw the bulkheads. And I find it's very helpful to make these crosses that help me to see the top, bottom, and left and right limits of what each bulkhead's going to be. And even to help a little bit more, you can draw rectangles to really visualize the space in which those bulkheads are going to fit. So going back up to the nose, that first bulkhead is going to be round. That's where the engine and the fuselage meet. That's basically, it's the back of the engine nacelle or engine cowling, and it's not a complete circle. It's kind of cropped off at the bottom. And then that's just the front of it, so that shows you where the cowling around the engine goes. And the bulkheads in the back of the plane were rectangular, and except for the tops, were rounded, so they're fairly simple to draw. And then we're going to outline the silhouette of the fuselage. So I find these inflection points, and then I just really have to kind of connect the dots, and that's my silhouette. And I do that for both sides. I do that at the top and the bottom. And we just go all the way around, and that completes the shape, the outline and shaping of the fuselage. And then the last thing I'm drawing there is just a line that divides the upper surface from the side of the fuselage. Now I'm going to do the landing gear, and the first thing I do is I draw some vertical lines to spot the left and right limits of the fuselage at ground level, and then a little outside of that is where the wheels go. Above it, I'm going to draw the axle, and then from there, it's easy for me to see where the wheels need to be drawn. And so I just draw a couple of ovals there. I'm just going to sort of rough them in at this point. I'll clean them up later. And then the fairing that goes around the axle, it's sort of a wing that is between the two wheels. It was a very common design feature of World War I biplanes. And then all that's left to do is the struts. And again, you're just using your side view and top view images as references. The next step is to outline and shape the wings and tail. And this is pretty easy to do. The wings and tail follow the scaffold very closely. For the upper wing, all I needed to do was draw that little cutout, and then I'm drawing these counterbalance tabs for the ailerons. The Fokker only had ailerons on the upper wing, so we'll draw the ailerons up there, and that outlines that upper wing. And to shape it, I'm going to draw the airfoils or wing ribs. And I don't need to draw every single wing rib. I just need to draw a few of them here so that I can see the shape of the wing. And as I draw these, I can see that the front edge of the wing needs to be raised up a little bit above the scaffold. So I'm adding a line here to indicate that. And to draw the rest of the ribs, all I'm going to do is add lines that will show me where the ridges on the canvas are for those ribs. And we just repeat that process for the other 2 wings, and then we're ready to move on to the tail. And the tail also, the hardest part of the tail is a vertical stabilizer, but just use your side view drawing and you shape it right inside of the scaffold here, so that shows me exactly where it goes and how big it needs to be. And the horizontal tail is pretty easy. There's the elevator hinge line, there's a little cutout so that the rudder could swing back and forth, and then I just need to round off the corners and draw the front edge of that horizontal stabilizer, and that's it. All the major parts of the airplane have been shaped, and now we're ready for the final step, which is the cleanup and final details. Since I'm doing this drawing with ArtRage Pro, my cleanup is pretty easy. All I have to do is turn off my reference grid and scaffold layers. If I was doing it by hand, of course, I'd have to erase all of those reference lines. So I can get right into doing the details, and the first thing I'm working on here are the twin Spandau machine guns that fired through the propeller arc. The interrupter gear that allowed these machine guns to fire through the propeller arc had been adopted by Fokker very early on in the war, and it was a very successful innovation. To draw the wing struts, I've added some temporary references to show me the mounting points on the upper wing for those struts, and that helps me get those struts aligned correctly. The Fokker Triplane used cantilevered wings, so these struts were really the only ones necessary to hold that in place. There were struts at the ends of the wings, but those were added after flight tests, and they mainly serve to keep the wingtips from warping. So the Fokker doesn't have all those cables, to reinforce or strengthen the wings like you'll see on a lot of other biplanes from this era. And so there's just a few last little details to add. The foothold, there's a handhold near the tail skid, and then there's a fairing that is pretty characteristic that you'll see on the triplane that faired the round engine cowling to the flat side of the fuselage there, right underneath that middle wing. And that's it. That's most of the details, so we can move on to doing our markings. So Werner Voss's plane had these Patek crosses, just like most other German aircraft of the First World War. And you just need to, if you're doing a specific plane, get a lot of good photographic references to help you make sure that you do all the markings correctly and get them in the right place. Voss had one cross on the rudder, one on the side of the plane, and then 2 on the upper surface of the top wing. So I've drawn all those in place. And next I'm adding the pilot in. So the most important thing to keep in mind when you're drawing your pilot or any human figure that's next to a plane is you want to make sure that the person is the correct size. If you draw the person too big, the plane's going to look small. If you draw the person too small, the plane's going to look big. And again, use photographic references to make sure you get it right, and any other information you can find to make sure your pilot's the right size. So we're getting close to the end here now. We're just going to do our shading and camo and background, and then we'll be all done. So I've decided to put the light source above and behind the pilot a little bit and out in front of the viewer. And so that means that shadows are going to be cast on the front part of the middle and lower wings, and also on the foreground surfaces of the airplane, the surfaces of the airplane that are facing the viewer. So all I'm doing here is just emphasizing my shadows for those surfaces, and then I've looked at a lot of references of Werner Voss's plane, and you can see that it reflects a fair amount of indirect light. So I'm adding some indirect light reflected off of the side of the fuselage facing us. And next I'm adding the camo pattern, the gray streaks that go across the upper surfaces of the wings and the tail and the side of the fuselage. You can see on the upper surfaces they kind of go diagonally, and on the side of the fuselage they go vertically. So once I get all those in, I'm going to add my shading to my pilot and cockpit area, and I just have to, always be consistent with how I do the light. So you'll see the specular light is on his back and the back of his head. And then I'm going to add the propeller, and we can just barely see the propeller above that middle wing there. And once we have that done, we've got really all of our shading and camo in, and now we're ready to do the background. So for the background, I'm going to draw Werner Voss's plane flying in front of some clouds. And I've just penciled in, you can see lightly, some ideas to suggest where the clouds are going to go. And so I filled in some shading. You can see some sky above and ground below, and then I'm adding the shading of the clouds, so I can have some nice, you want your clouds to look nice and puffy. Just take here I'm taking my palette tool to smudge the graphite. If you were doing this by hand, you just use your finger to smear the graphite or the charcoal, and you want to do that for your clouds. You want it kind of makes them nice and fluffy looking. And what I do, I really just kind of improvise a lot when I'm doing a cloudscape background. You'll add and remove clouds a lot until you get it the way you like it. You want your background to be balanced. You want it to be interesting, but you don't want it to detract from the foreground. So it requires some trial and error, and that's all I'm doing here. I'm just kind of adding and removing stuff. But eventually, I get it to where I like it. And here's the final drawing of Werner Voss flying one of the most iconic airplanes of the First World War. So if you want to do this drawing yourself, go to my website. You can download a free workbook that will help you out, or you can go to Amazon and buy my book, The Art of Drawing Airplanes. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and this is Greg Goodwin wishing you many happy hours drawing airplanes.